Okay, good morning, students. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, am I audible? Clear enough?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can you see my screen? I am sharing the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, good. Okay, so let us start. So, in the yesterday's lecture, I told you in brief regarding what various kinds of disasters there may be. Basically, there are two types depending on the origin. So, one is natural disasters where the origin lies in nature. The other one is the non-natural or man-made or disasters, which can be called as industrial disasters. And in continuation with that lecture today, I am sharing a presentation where you'll see mm, the introduction to few of the terminologies uh, that are very important and crucial in disaster management or disaster preparedness, planning management, whatever you could say. Okay, the first term when you are going to encounter, if you really want to concentrate your research in disaster preparedness or management, is a term known as hazard. So the hazard, as you can see it on the screen, there are different definitions of the term, and depending on from which field you are actually belonging or in which field you want to concentrate your research on, there may be a slight change in the original definition, but the crux of the meaning or the meaning of the entire term is more or less the same. So by saying in different domains, I want to say that some are more emphasized towards the disaster management part, and some people they want to really focus their time nowadays in climate change or climate action. So the world community is again divided. The world community is divided in these two spheres. One sphere is the disaster management, and then the other sphere is the climate change, or climate action takers. So nowadays, these two things are quite interlinked, and you cannot really, it's very difficult to separate. But normally, the climate actioneers or the climate change community, they want to focus their actions in pursuit of a long-term goal. Okay, so that is one of the differences. So few of the terms are common to both these domains, and then more or less the crux, the meaning of these terminologies are very much the same. So since we are going to define the term hazard, I am picking up this definition from UNISDR. Okay, so United Nations Division on Disaster Risk Reduction. So it says that hazard is a dangerous phenomenon, a substance or human activity or a condition that may cause loss of life. Yes, can you hear me? Any question? Injury or other health impacts, property damage, loss of livelihoods and services, social and economic disruption, or environmental damage. So, hazard actually, in that sense, actually is a potential event or an event which is natural in origin which has the potential to cause damage. That means if you consider a flood that happens in certain part of the basin, it is actually a hazard. That is not a disaster. Similarly, if you say that there is an earthquake, so earthquake actually is a hazard. A landslide is a hazard, and then again a cyclone is a hazard. So then why we have these two terms? One is a hazard, another one is disaster. So can you put your idea forward? Do you think hazard and disaster is same? That is the question. Can you hear me, all of you? Hello.
Yes.
Ah, so okay, so let us let us discuss this thing. By doing so, you will better remember these definitions. Okay. So what I say is, do you think that the word hazard and then disaster, these two words, are same, or are they different? Yes. Yes. Who would like to proceed?
It's maybe
So please tell your name and then, yeah, forward the discussion. Apung Dudum. So we have a definition of hazards. You can see it on the screen. Now I would like to ask the class, what is the difference in your understanding of these two words known as a hazard and then a disaster? You may be wrong or you may have a different understanding, but it is very important to speak up. So let us speak. Who would like to volunteer? Anyone?
being hazard means
Please.
effect due to human
First of
activities.
all, please tell me your name. I cannot see your face here. What's your name?
Navam Tagap, sir.
Mm-hmm. Nabam Takap.
Navam Tagap.
Okay, so you were from section A?
Section B, sir.
Section B. Okay, so Nabam. Yes, so what do you think? There is a difference. Please speak.
Hazards, it means it is human activities due to the
Due to human
human
activity.
acts.
Uh, and
And disasters is due to nature.
disasters are due to
Nature.
nature. Okay. So, anyone else who would like to volunteer? Somebody? What may be a difference between a hazard and a disaster? As Nabam said, hazard, its origin lies in human activities, and disasters are non-human. That is the origin. So, do you think it may be the true difference?
Yes, sir. I think it's different.
Okay, okay. See, that is
Hazard is
that,
yes,
uh,
situation.
uh, I actually would like to put forward these discussions because in this level, uh, this is the part of the tutorial, that is known as the tutorial. Okay, so you have the lecture. The lecture is supposed to be I will speak, and then you are going to listen, and then Tutorial is where everybody takes part. So this 2 credit course comprises of a lecture part and then a tutorial part. Okay, LTP, and then P part is not there. P means the practical. So 1 credit for the lecture, another credit for the tutorial. That means we will go together. Not only that I will only speak in the monologue terms, you will just listen. Rather, you have to actively take part in these discussions. So the first discussion that I'm showing is today, hazards and disasters. Are both the same, or are they somehow different? So as Nabam said, hazard, the origin lies in human activity, and then disasters, these are non-human. How many of you agree, or is there a different understanding on your part? Please say.
I'm agree with Sir Navam Takap.
Okay, so let me see your name. Who is you? Who are you? Who's this? Your
It's
name?
me, Navam Larsen.
Okay.
Sir Navam Larsen.
Okay, so you are also from section B?
Sir, I'm from section B.
Okay. Okay. Nabam Larsen. Anyone else? Okay, see, there is nothing that I'm going to criticize, or there is nothing that I'm going to contradict. But
Sir,
this is, yeah, this.
hello.
Yes, yes, yeah. Who is this? Bijoy
Sir,
Chaudhary?
it's not 100% correct that because
Yeah.
yes,
So,
sir, is Vijay Chaudhary.
uh-huh. So, what may be the difference?
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, it's not 100% correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's not 100% correct that disaster can be happen only by nature.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be happen human being also.
Okay. So that is how we have classified the disasters in the last class, right? There may be
Yes, sir.
man-made, or there may be natural disasters. So, what may be the difference in terms of the hazard and disaster?
So, hazard is an event that has potential for causing injury or loss of life
Uh-huh.
or damage to property and environment. Sir, and whereas disaster is an event that occurs suddenly and unexpectedly and disrupt the normal courses of the life in an affected area. Sir.
Okay. So this is Oliver, né? Oliver from
Sir.
section B or section A?
Section A.
A, section A. Oliver from Manipur?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yeah, see, now since we are participating in these discussions, a lot of different opinions and different dimensions of these definitions and discussions are opening up. So some of you were saying that hazards are something which have the potential to cause damage. So this is very important. Okay. So first, in order to progress in this direction, we have to admit that all the hazards are natural. Okay. That means the hazard, the source of the hazard lies in nature. That means if there is a river and then during the monsoon the river water swells up and then it uh, overflows the banks and then this water inundates the adjoining areas, this is not a disaster, this is a hazard. Hmm. This is a hazard. So first you have to understand that this is not the disaster. A flood is a hazard. An earthquake is a hazard. A landslide is a hazard. A tsunami also is a hazard. Then what is a disaster? Hmm.
Sir,
Now,
sir,
yes.
this is
Sir, disaster when this hazard come of this when
Hmm.
when hazard
Yes.
uh, become
Yes.
effect in the property for human life,
Yeah.
it makes it become disaster.
That is true. So you see, I think you close your mic. Mhm. So you are part in na takim.
Yes, yes, sir.
Mhm. So okay, again mute yourself. So what Takin said is actually the difference between a hazard and a disaster. So all these events which have the potential to cause damage in terms of loss of lives, injury, property damage, loss of livelihoods and services, social and economic disruptions or environmental damage, all these things, these events are hazards. But we call it a disaster the moment these hazards interact with the society or the social sphere in an adverse manner. That means you understand that you have the potential to do an activity. As long as you do not do it, this is a hazard. But the moment you do it, and then by your actions, some adverse impact is created in terms of loss of livelihoods, someone's property is gone, someone may lose their life, or you may cause injury. At that point of time, this hazard translates into a so-called disaster. Okay? So as I said, if there is a flood in certain area in the river, and then this water is not killing people, this water is not damaging the paddy fields, the water is not obstructing the roads, the railway lines, the economy, or any other environmental issues, we will say that this is a hazard. And then this hazard is very, very natural. There is nothing unnatural about a hazard. Okay? Understand? Hazards are all natural. You just see everywhere. If there is a flood that happens in the river, why will we say that this is not natural? Unless there are no man-made uh, intervention to the floods. So floods caused by a dam break is not natural, but the river running flood or the seasonal flood is very much a natural event. Since history or since time immemorial, these events are taking place through generations. There have been floods in history. You look back, you just Google. Big floods have been taking place. Every year there are floods that happen. So we cannot say the flood is a non-natural event. So the takeaway from this lecture up till now is that a hazard is a natural event. There is nothing unnatural as long as you are considering it a non-human intervention. Okay? Then a hazard is something which has the potential to cause damage, but the damage has not been done so far. The moment the hazard takes place and then it interacts with the society in an adverse manner so that there are damages taking place in the society, we say that the hazard has translated into a disaster. Take an example. I'll show you a photograph, okay? Wait a minute. I don't know if I have this. Okay, so see these photographs here. Uh, so take an example of these coastal floods. You can see it here, right? So these coastal floods are happening near to a house or a building. So if this house was not there, then probably there would have been no disaster for these people who were living inside this house. So in that point of time, it would have been only a hazard. But since the house is there, and then whoever was there in the house were adversely affected by this coastal flooding, for them, this hazard has actually been translated into a disaster. Okay. Okay. And we have another very important component of hazard. That is actually from the point of view of a scientific analysis. So how it makes sense is that every hazard has a probability of occurrence. So you please write down this thing. Every hazard, when we talk about a hazard, every hazard, may be a flood, may be an earthquake, may be a landslide, may be a tsunami, cyclone, whatever, you name a hazard, okay? That is natural in nature. All these hazards, they do have one probability of occurrence. So what is this? Have you learned about statistics so far? Or do you have a hydrology class so far? Huh? Do you?
No, sir.
No? Okay, so see, again, this is a little bit, how to say, philosophical. So, since we all are a part of nature, you are a natural part, I am a part of nature, your surroundings is a part of nature, even your house is a part of nature, your village is a part of nature, everything that you see around you, it is a part of nature. So, all these events that take part in nature are not deterministic. That means all these events, they have an event that precedes that event, and then there is an effect that succeeds that event. That means, suppose, for example, if you uh, go to a market, then if you see something very interesting, a shirt or a trouser, a pair of trousers, then sometimes even if you do not want to buy it, but if you find it at a reduction price, you probably will be buying it. Okay, that is one example. So how this makes sense? So actually you didn't before think that you will go to buy the pair of shirt. So your buying of the shirt actually is triggered by the fact that there was a reduction in the price or the cost. So that is the event that preceded your buying of the shirt. So that is a stochastic event. That means you were not sure that 100% you were going to buy a shirt. Somehow, some events triggered this response in you, and then you bought it. So all these events in nature, any event in nature, are all stochastic. That means all these events, they do have the chance of occurrence. So your chance of buying the shark on that day was determined by the fact that you had a 50% sale. Okay? So likewise, the chance of occurring a hazard also have a similar meaning. So can you really say that this year there will be a very big flood in a river near your house? No, you cannot say 100% sure that there will be a flood of this magnitude in this river. You cannot really predict this fact 1 year ahead unless you model something, unless you model the scenarios, but simply by looking at the river, you cannot say that there will be a flood of this particular dimension or magnitude. So that means the occurrence of the flood, there is a chance or a probability. Similarly, there is also a probability that is attached to all these kinds of natural events. May it be a flood, may it be an earthquake, may it be a tsunami, a cyclone, whatever you can call it. Means, as being a part of the entire nature, we all follow this stochastic phenomenon of nature. Nothing is deterministic. You cannot be 100% sure about the occurrence of anything. So, in the extreme sense, we can say that the Earth may be hit by an asteroid tomorrow. There may be a very very less chance or probability of occurrence of this hazard. But still, there is a probability of occurrence. You cannot nullify this fact that the Earth can never be hit by an asteroid tomorrow. So there is, however small, there is a probability of occurrence attached to these kind of natural events. So that is we call probability of occurrence. So hazard, all the hazards, they do have a probability of occurrence. Okay. On the other hand, this again you will be taught later in the classes, especially in your higher semesters, in the hydrology class, that the higher the probability, the smaller is the magnitude. Understand? There is an inverse relationship between these two things. What are these two things? Higher the probability, lower is the magnitude. That means if you say that by in the next 10 years there would be an earthquake of magnitude 8, it has a little bit less probability because magnitude 8 is very big. But in the next 10 years, if you say that there will be an earthquake of magnitude 3, 2, it has a higher probability of occurrence. Understood? So these two facts are inversely related to one another. Smaller is the magnitude, higher is the probability. So that means you can say that in this year there would be a higher chance of occurrence of a smaller flood in the river near you, but there is a smaller chance of occurrence of a very big flood in the river near you. Okay? So what are the two things that you have learned now? Hazard is a natural thing. Hazard has the potential to cause damage. Whenever hazard causes a damage by interacting with the society in an adverse manner or a negative manner, at that point of time, the hazard translates into a disaster. And then this is a difference between the hazard and the disaster. The last one is all hazards, they do have a probability of occurrence. Why? Because we all are a part of nature, even the hazards. And then this probability of occurrence is inversely related to the magnitude of the event. Understood? Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Clear? Okay, now come back to an example. So in your multiple choice type questions, sometimes I may ask you a question like this. A flood that occurs in the middle of a desert, what is it? Number one, a disaster. Number two, hazard. Number three, uh, vulnerability. Number four, risk. So what would be the answer? A flood that occurs in the middle of a desert. There are rivers in the deserts. I don't know if you know it or not. Floods do occur even in places in Middle East or in Australia where we have just vast patches of deserts. So what will you call this kind of floods? In the middle of a desert where there are no people. So what would be the right term to identify this kind of event? Number one
Can
is
you repeat the sir option?
okay. So number one is disaster. Number two is hazard. Number three is vulnerability. Number four is risk.
Hazard, sir.
Hmm?
Hazard, sir. Hazard.
Hazard. Very good.
Hazard.
So why we call it a hazard? Because
Sir, because they didn't
yes,
affect human life, sir.
very good. Because it has not really affected society as a whole in an adverse manner. So all these events are hazards, natural hazards. Okay, I think this is clear. So this is our starting point of the whole subject or lecture. You need to really be clear on these terminologies. There is a word known as hazard. There is a word known as a disaster. So far today you have learned these two things. Okay? So do not confuse it further in your life. Sometimes if there is a layman or sometimes there is a person who has not studied disaster management, they may confuse it. At that point of time, you can correct them or you should understand what actually the person wants to say. Sometimes people, they don't have this minute differences in their mind. But in academic environment, especially someone who is studying the subject, I think it is important for them to know between these different terms, their meaning, and then the differences. Okay, so one One definition of the hazard as given by UNISDR is there on the screen. As you can see, it's a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity, condition that may cause loss of life. So there is a small word there. It says that may cause. Okay, so that may cause loss of life. So that means it has potential to cause, but it doesn't say that it already has done the loss. So that is the difference. The key word is there. Okay, so that is the key word that is given by UNISDR. Come back to the second definition. In technical settings, hazards are described quantitatively by the likely frequency of occurrence of different intensities for different areas as determined from historical data or scientific analysis. Okay, so this is a little bit technical in terms, but the essence is again uh, we have discussed. So that means hazards are described quantitatively by likely frequency of occurrence. That means if we agree that all floods are basically hazards, first of all, it has to be a hazard. Then how will we say that one flood is a bigger flood, another flood is a smaller flood? Remember, we are not comparing disasters, we are comparing hazards. So far, as we say, these are hazards. That means these hazards have not so far interacted with the society. Let's say, in that case, how will you compare two different hazards or three hazards? Hazards are described quantitatively by the likely frequency of occurrence. Frequency of occurrence means how frequently the hazards may occur. So this frequency of occurrence again tells you about the probability of occurrence. So remember, we discussed it earlier that all hazards, they do have one probability of occurrence. So the bigger the probability of occurrence, smaller is the magnitude of the hazard, and then we can say that this is a small hazard. If there is a smaller probability of occurrence, definitely that would be a very big hazard, and then we will say that this is a big hazard, a big flood, or big earthquake. Okay, so sometimes in order to compare between two floods or two earthquakes or two landslides even occurring in the same area or within the same basin, we have to check into these magnitudes, or even if we know about the probabilities of occurrences, we can calculate the magnitudes. So how these magnitudes are found? So for different hazards, we look into the different parameters of the hazards. For example, if we talk about floods, what are the parameters of the floods that we will look in order to compare between two floods? This is the question. So do you have something to say here? If you want to compare two floods, remember these floods, they are still at the hazard state. They have not really killed anyone, they haven't really done any damage. But in that case, how will you compare these two floods? Which is a bigger flood? That is the question. Anybody? So the answer is there in the screen itself.
Frequency of occurrence.
Frequency of occurrence you cannot directly see, This frequency is inversely related to the magnitude of the floods. That means the
Yes.
bigger the flood, the smaller is the frequency or the probability of occurrence. So in order to see first the magnitude, we have to look into some key parameters of the floods themselves. One of these parameters in case of floods are, number one, it may be the discharge of water in the river. Discharge means the volume of water that is being released in the river. Again, coming back to your hydrology class or open channel flow, whatever. So, how do you calculate this discharge in a particular river? As civil engineers, remember the equation Q is equal to A into V. A is, Q is the discharge, that is the unit of meter cube per second or whatever. Then A on the other side of the equation, it is the cross-sectional area in the river. When you cut the river across, then you get the cross-sectional area. And then V is the velocity of water. So there are instruments with which you have to measure the velocity of water at different points in the river. And then if you already found out the cross-sectional area of the river, you can find out the discharge that is taking place in the particular day or in a particular instant of time in the river. So normally, remember in the flood, what happens? These volumes of water increases. That means discharge increases. So if you can find out the discharge that took place in the year 1998 in the same point in the river, the same cross section in the river, and then you have the data to compare the discharge in the year 2021 by simply measuring these two discharges. You can tell which is a bigger flood. Which is a bigger flood? The flood that produced a bigger discharge. That is just one of the parameters. Okay, so anyway, we will stop here for the time being because our time's almost is going to finish. So I hope I could deliver something that is understandable to you by this lecture today. And then I will again, as I said, I'll share the link for your attendances to give. And then if you want to discuss or ask questions, just quickly wrap it up. We have around 2 minutes time. Again, please, I'm going to share the videos as well. So just listen to the videos and then whatever books and notes that I'm going to share, go through them. Okay, understandable? Everything clear? That is good?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. So we stop for the time being, nah? See you next week. By the way, in between there may be first sessional exam. I'm not sure still now. There are chances that it will take place quite soon. So whatever is being discussed till now in these two classes uh, will be just coming in those two exams. Very rudimentary, very elemental things I will ask.
Sure.
Ah,
So when will the third semester exam result out, sir?
oh, that I don't know. We have to check with the exam department. I don't have any information to tell you right now. Okay. Even I don't know that.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Then so.
Okay. Bye bye.